So I want to welcome everyone. My name is Michelle Buman. I'm the program specialist at the Iowa City Johnson County Senior Center. It's my pleasure to have you all here today and to celebrate the United Nations International Day of the Older Persons. We've been doing this program in collaboration with the local United Nations Association, the University of Iowa School of Social Work at Aging and Longevity Studies for a number of years. And over the years, we've focused on different topics, and this year we are spotlighting housing insecurity and human rights here in Johnson County. We believe that housing is a human right, and the impacts that it has on older adults is lesser known in our community. And our hope is that by spotlighting it today, that folks will get a better idea of what's happening in our community. So I'll get to the next slide. We want to thank all of our sponsors. There are several speakers here that I didn't have logos for, so I want to recognize the University of Iowa School of Planning and Public Affairs, Johnson County, and Shelter House, and the Affordable Housing Coalition for taking time to be here today. So this is our agenda today. Obviously, my name is Michelle and I'm welcoming you. Then I'll turn it over to Mercedes Byrne-Klug from the School of Social Work, and she'll be providing you with an overview of our program and what the United Nations Day of Older Persons is all about. And then we're going to follow that up with a panel of experts in the field locally. As you can see, this list will go in this order.
Let me start out by saying Happy International Day of Older Persons. Since the early 1990s, the world has been celebrating October 1st as the United Nations Day of Older Persons. It was an important initiative to start to bring more attention to the fact that all over the world, the proportion of persons 65 and older is increasing, especially in countries with developing economies. And so the United Nations decided to really look at many of their activities to see, are we being culturally competent related to age as well? And since then has really developed numerous committees to focus on the experience of older adulthood and how do we help persons who are currently in older adulthood. And the United Nations has taken a lifespan approach. So they're not just focused on people who are older. They're looking at how the experience of being an infant, a toddler, a teenager, a young adult, those cumulative advantages or those cumulative disadvantages and what the impact might be in older adulthood. So the United Nations is looking to make guidelines for countries to use for societies that make a place for people of all ages. So today is International Day of Older Persons. And when this was first started, the United Nations released principles for older persons. And these are these 5 principles in front of you that are accompanied by 18 statements, a couple under each of these 5, as guidance for societies that really wanted to make sure that older adults were able to participate in society to the extent that they wanted to. And I just want to read a couple of these statements that are directly related to housing and which in part inspired us and inspired this theme for this year. So under independence, the first statement, the first of 18 statements in the whole set is, older persons should have access to adequate food, water, shelter, clothing, and healthcare through the provision of income, family, and community support and self-help. That's the first one of the statements. And then statement number 5, older persons should be able to live in environments that are safe and adaptable to personal preferences and changing capacities. Number 6 of 18, older persons worldwide should be able to reside at home for as long as possible. And then the last one I wanted to pull out was under the principle of care. It's statement number 14. Older persons should be able to enjoy human rights and fundamental freedoms when residing in any shelter. So as you can see throughout these United Nations principles and statements, the issue of housing and shelter is prevalent. And so what we wanted to do was take it back down to our Johnson County area, including Iowa City, to better understand what are the housing concerns of older adults and what are some of the resources. So thank you, Michelle, for being our moderator and our host for this session, and welcome everybody to this year's International Day of Older Persons in Iowa City. The other thing I wanted to mention, in addition to this being the day, October 1st, International Day of Older Persons, the United Nations and the World Health Organization is starting what they're calling the Decade of Healthy Aging. And so they've produced a series of materials that countries can use to really focus on what has to happen in this decade between 2020 and 2030 in order to really increase the quality of life, the sense of well-being, and the health of older adults. So if you're interested in that material, there's the link on the website, and they've collected a lot of good material and in multiple languages. That's all for me now, Michelle.
So to get started, I would like to introduce Jerry Anthony. He's with the University of Iowa School of Planning and Public Affairs, and we'll be talking about housing insecurity, the impact on older adults, trends and challenges. So Jerry, if you want to go ahead and take us from here, that would be great.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I'm really happy to be here to talk about this topic. As I guess all of us know, America's older population is in the midst of an unprecedented growth. By 2030, the older population in the US is projected to be about people that are aged 50 and above are expected to be 132 million. By 2030, 1 in 5 Americans in the US would be above age 65. By 2034, for the first time in US history, the number of people who are aged 65 and above would outnumber children aged 18 or below. So all these things are coming. And by 2040, 1 in 8 people in the US would be above the age of 75. So the topic for our panel today is housing insecurity primarily for the older population. Now, housing is important for everyone, right? Housing is important as in that principle that Mercedes read out. One of the first principles is housing is needed, food, shelter, clothing, right? So shelter is really important for all of us. It's one of the basic physiological needs that we need. It is one of those safety needs as well. It is related to, say, belonging. It's related to esteem, and we really need good quality housing, reasonably priced, well-located housing to help us to survive and thrive as individuals in any country, anywhere. Any country, anywhere. Therefore, affordable, accessible, well-located housing, everyone needs it. But more so for people that are above 50 and more so people that are above 65 years of age. So I'm going to go back and forth on these 3 things for the next 3 things that I mentioned for the next few minutes: affordability of housing, accessibility, and being well located. First, about the affordability. Housing is the most expensive item in most household budgets, and if you don't have reasonably priced housing, then you're paying too much for that housing, and you're cutting back on other quality of life essential expenditures, like on food, on transportation, on healthcare. So having reasonably priced housing is very important for a good quality of life. Moving on to accessibility, for older adults, for their health and safety, accessibility is very important within the house and in the neighborhood as physical and cognitive limitations increase. Proximity to stores, services, and transportation enables older adults to remain active and productive members in their communities, meet their own basic needs, and maintain social connections. And for adults with chronic conditions or disabilities, availability of housing with supports and services determines the quality and the cost of long-term care. So how is America's housing stock? Is it geared up for this task for meeting the needs of older Americans? Sadly, it isn't. Many older adults in the US live in high-cost housing that forces them to spend lots of money, a big proportion of their income on housing. Much of the country's housing inventory lacks basic accessibility features, preventing older adults with disabilities from living safely and comfortably in their homes. Much of the nation's transportation and pedestrian infrastructure is ill-suited to those who cannot drive or choose not to drive, isolating older adults from friends and family. And then there are massive disconnects between housing programs and the healthcare system that puts many older adults with disabilities or long-term care needs, those that have long-term care needs, at risk of premature institutionalization. So therefore, the housing stock currently is really not geared up for accommodating older adults. So now let me come back to the first point that I mentioned, housing costs. In the US today, a third of all adults aged 50 or over pay more than 30% of their income for housing. Among adults aged 65 or more, 50%, so half of all adults above the age of 65, pay more than 30% of their income for rent or towards mortgages. Among those, these people who pay more than 30% of their income towards housing are called cost-burdened persons. Among cost-burdened renters that are above 65, 60% are severely cost-burdened, that is paying more than 50% of their income towards housing. This is among renters. And among owners, 46% are severely cost-burdened. So lots of people above the age of 65 are entering that age, entering 65 and into their 70s, carrying lots of housing costs with them. Another thing that we have seen in census data, people above the age of 65 are entering those years, 65 and above, carrying lots of mortgage debt. In 1992, so about 30 years ago, only 18% of people aged 65 and above had any kind of mortgage debt. By 2010, that proportion had increased to 40%. So it doubled from 18% actually in 1992 to 40% in 2010. And in 2020, the estimates are about 45%. So lots of people coming in carrying mortgage debt. Also, for those carrying mortgage debt, age 65 and above, the loan to value ratio, so the amount of mortgage debt that they are carrying, is also increasing. In 1992, the loan to value ratio of those who were carrying mortgage debt, remember there were fewer people carrying mortgage debt, but of the people that were carrying mortgage debt, age 65 and above, the loan to value ratio was about 28%. In 2010, that ratio was 45%. In 2020, the ratio was 54%. So lots more. So this is homeowners, right? So this is lots more homeowners carrying mortgage debt into age 65 and above, and they're carrying much more mortgage debt. What about renters? The number of older low-income renters has skyrocketed. In 2003, there were just about 3 million low-income renters. By 2011, that number had increased by a third to 4 million. By 2020, that number had increased to about 5.1 million. By 2030, it's expected to be 6.5 million. So these are low-income renters who should get some kind of public support for their housing needs. And how much housing stock do we have, or how much housing assistance do we have, assisted housing do we have to help these people? In 2003, of the 3.1 million older low-income renters, only 1 million, less than a third, got any kind of federal housing assistance. In 2010, it increased a bit. The number of people getting assistance increased a bit to 1.3 million. And at that time, there were 4 million older low-income renters. And by 2020, the number hasn't budged much. So there is a big need to provide more housing assistance for people. among among older adults, most people prefer to live in private homes. So we've seen lots of talk about people wanting to live in group homes or wanting to live in condominiums and all of that. But even so, even though there are lots of people moving, lots of people above the age of 65 live in private homes. In fact, in 2015, of people in, let's say, the age group 65 to 79, 70% lived in single family homes. 70% lived in single family homes. And if you combine that with condominiums, about 75% of people above 65, below 80, lived in single family homes. There's a big need there's a big desire to live in single family homes. But unfortunately, most of these homes lack accessibility features. There are 5 features that are tracked by the US Census Bureau: extra wide hallways and doorways, lever style handles and doors and faucets, no step entry, accessible electrical controls, and single floor living. In 2001, less than 2% of the housing stock had more than one of these features. The most common feature was single floor living, and that was because in the 1940s and 50s, many homes were built that were single floor. But other than that, many houses did not have any more of these features that are needed for essential quality for people to live in their homes. And when older movers move, they seek more accessible housing that has more of these features. And there's lots of information, census information that tracks that. Many of our older adults with disabilities live within the community. In 2020, 35% of people aged 80 and above that had disabilities lived on their own in communities, and their needs to be taken care of. So what can we do? So lots of things are happening, and the population is aging. The housing stock is not up to snuff to take care of the needs of the older population, and there's a big tsunami of older people coming. So what can we do? And I'm getting to this Johnson County level in just a second, okay? But at the federal level, more funding for rental housing programs. More funding is needed. Public housing and Section 8 programs. The public housing program has not built any new public housing since about the 1990s. The Section 8 program gives out about 2.3 million vouchers, but there are many more people who need it. And so a big expansion of that. More funding for supportive services that enable older adults to age in place, given adults' preferences and the low supply of housing appropriate for older adults. At the state and local level, states and localities can mandate that all new construction have multiple accessibility features, offer tax incentives, grants, and low-cost loans to help older adults modify existing homes to enable them to stay longer, modify zoning to promote ADU, that is accessory dwelling units, and mixed-use developments that add housing and services near transit access points. And localities can ensure that a wide range of services are available for older adults. State Medicaid programs could reorient themselves to allow older adults more funding for supportive services that enable older low-income persons to age in the community rather than in institution settings. But there are opportunities for the private sector as well. Huge opportunities in home remodeling, delivering goods and services to older adults, and developing new communities with integrated housing and services for older adults that promote independence and integration with the community in diverse locations across the county. So let me just come to Johnson County. Johnson County has the dubious distinction of being the county among the 99 counties in the state that has the highest proportion of cost-burdened persons, bar none. In most states, it is the most populous county that has that distinction, if you will, but in Iowa, it is Johnson County that has. And 34% of Johnson County's households are cost-burdened, 21% of all owners are cost-burdened, and 56% of all renters are cost-burdened. In Johnson County today, we have 10,600 approximately households where one adult is age 65 or older. Of these, 2,300 are renter households, and 8,300 are owner households. Now, we don't have a good handle on how many of them are cost burden because the census doesn't track it very well. But we know how many owners are not paying a mortgage. And assuming that most people above 65 or people without that are not paying a mortgage or above 65, making that assumption. And I know it's not a very correct assumption, but that's the only way to get at this. But assuming that, there are 1,000 households that do not have a mortgage that pay more than 30% of their income for housing every month. These are owner households. And there are 400 owner households that don't have a mortgage that are paying more than 50%. These people, these households have a very, very poor quality of life, and their quality of life really needs some support from us. In Iowa City, there's a public housing program that provides some housing. There is a Section 8 program that provides some housing. In 2010, about 20% of the beneficiaries of these two housing programs were elders or people with disabilities. In 2020, it's 55%. So the number of people that are seeking assistance has increased, but there are so many more people that need assistance than the system can provide, than we can provide. So there's a big need to increase the support for elders, especially low-income elders, make them housing secure and ensure that they have decent quality of life in age 65 and over. Sorry, I've gone a bit over time. Apologies.
Here we go. And I want to welcome Jessica Indino. And she is, I have a little bit of a background on her. She's a graduate research assistant and second-year PhD student at the Department of Community Behavioral Health. She focuses on eliminating health disparities through innovative community-based approaches and preventative medicine, with a particular interest in low-income housing for residents of Iowa. We're very fortunate to have her because she is the chair of the Human Rights Commission for the City of Iowa City, and she's on the City of Iowa City Affordable Housing Steering Committee and Board of Directors for the Housing Trust Fund of Johnson County. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say to add to that about your role and involvement in local housing issues involving older adults in our community.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. Can you hear me okay? Excellent. Well, thanks again. I'm really excited to be here and speak to all of you today, but I do plan on keeping my comments somewhat brief. I'm not a professor yet like Dr. Anthony is. So currently, I do serve as the chair for the Human Rights Commission for the City of Iowa City. This is my third and final year on that commission. But as Michelle mentioned, I'm also a second-year PhD student in the College of Public Health's Community and Behavioral Health Department. And my primary interest and focus is on social determinants of health, specifically related to housing in Iowa and how housing shapes health. So as Mercedes had kind of mentioned earlier, there's that lifespan or accumulation approach to how we shape people and who people are, and housing throughout a lifetime can actually affect the overall well-being and quality of life that individuals in our community have. I think Jerry had also mentioned this, so I'm glad we're in agreement. But I'm here today to talk primarily about my role as the chair and about the Human Rights Commission for the City of Iowa City and how housing issues are related to older adults in our community. I will say that the Human Rights Commission also sits in other areas as well. But overall, as an introduction, we are a 9-member voluntary commission. Each commissioner is appointed by the City Council, and we serve to benefit the community through education, activities, and programs related to the elimination of discrimination in all forms in our community. Annually, we have a competitive grant process for $75,000, which hopefully we will get more funding in the future as well, which we give to local nonprofits and agencies for new projects to better the Iowa City area in terms of racial equity and social justice. I do see actually a few former grant recipients on the call with us today, which kind of demonstrates that link that we have with housing as well. The commission also assists the City Office of Equity and Human Rights on complaints made by residents when their civil or human rights are being unlawfully violated. We have specific methods for residents to file complaints for discrimination of housing, and these would be discriminations that are protected both by the Fair Housing Act, a federal act, and then also additional ordinances that have been added by the City of Iowa City, such as age. Marital status is another one as well. I guess I should mention on that complaint method, it's confidential in manner. You can do it online or you can do it via paper copy. And even to the commission, we do not know who is making complaints or at what part complaints are in. They're not discussed at public meetings either. So it's a pretty good process that we have in that office. But as mentioned by Jerry earlier, older adults face many different forms of discrimination when finding affordable and appropriate housing in especially our competitive market. However, everyone should have the right to age in place if they choose to do so within our community, even though there are different challenges that are being faced by older adults. I'll say all acts of discrimination are encouraged to be reported in order to find these remedies within our market, and then also for remedies of the individual of how they are being mistreated. These are often resolved by city staff through efforts of mediation between the perpetrators and the individuals filing the complaints. I will also say we collect data on trends of discrimination within the housing and rental market, and we can use that data to benefit those groups that are continually discriminated against. And then we also use the data that we get from those, again, confidential data, to see where our commission can focus our efforts in community outreach and also prevention. The City of Iowa City's Human Rights Commission and the Office of Equity and Human Rights collaborate with other agencies, businesses, and nonprofits that we have in our community in order to protect against unlawful discrimination against all protected characteristics, which would include age, and to help ensure that everybody within our community has their rights upheld. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I have worked with Jeff Kilbach for a few years in a couple different capacities. He knows the Iowa City, Johnson County community very, very well. His current role, you've been in your role for about 3 years now with Johnson County as the aging specialist. And we're really grateful for him through the Senior Center because we get lots and lots of calls here that we transfer to Jeff. And he is the go-to guy in the community to answer everything about finding services locally. And so that's what he'll be talking about today, is giving you an overview of related services that older adults can access to remain in their home of choice. So I'll turn it over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Michelle. And yes, you definitely get some interesting questions coming from the Senior Center and just from the community and as a whole. My role here as aging specialist is kind of a couple of different things. One, I serve as the staff liaison for Johnson County Livable Communities. Livable Communities is a unifying structure that our mission is to foster an effective collaboration, communication, education that will build and sustain a livable community for successful aging. That's the key piece there. We want to foster an environment for successful aging for folks. We do have a website that I help maintain. It still works, livablecommunity.org. If you go to that, it will take you now to our new website on the Johnson County's website. Before, we used to be a separate website. This is so much better to be part of the county's website. People are oftentimes not sure how Livable Communities fits into there. Livable Communities is a board of the Board of Supervisors of Johnson County. All of the policy board members are selected by our Board of Supervisors. Anyway, you want more information, go to livablecommunity.org. A lot of great information there. One thing I do maintain on that site is a service directory. Included in that service directory are a lot of the housing options that are in existence. At the end of my presentation, I'll share my information, phone number, email address, the livablecommunity.org website, a couple other websites that I'll be talking about here as well. One of those being resident options. There is a document in our housing section of the website that talks about the 6 different categories of residential care communities: independent senior living, which could include apartments within a complex, townhomes, cottages, duplexes, or those located on a senior living campus. Assisted living, I would imagine most people are familiar with assisted living, nursing homes, memory care, continuing care, retirement communities, and hospice homes. So that document is listed, and I'll put that link in there at the end as well. But my main role with the county is fielding phone calls, as Michelle kind of alluded to. Take a lot of different phone calls, and housing is certainly one of the number one, if not by far the number one issue that people are calling about. Trying to figure out maybe how to stay in their home, it's possible that they need some chore services, snow removal, lawn care. I help try and get them connected with affordable options for that. It really depends on the individual's financial situation, but I would say most of the individuals I'm working with largely are going to be lower income individuals they're struggling, as Jerry kind of indicated in his presentation. I help people figure out what are those different subsidized options? What are the differences between those subsidized options? How do I get applied for it? And also, are there utility assistance programs? If somebody's going into a HUD apartment, those things are going to be included in the apartment itself. Now, if it's in another subsidized unit, sometimes those, subsidized doesn't always mean affordable for an individual as well. So we really are trying to figure out, that rent's a little bit higher. How can we help them out? So getting them in touch with HACAP's LIHEAP program, which is a low income home energy assistance program, which actually for older adults, applications are allowed to go in today. October 1st is the day. The rest those with disabilities as well. The rest of the general public that meet the financial guidelines would be able to apply November 1st. I also try and make sure they know about utility discount programs. City of Iowa City, for instance, is a program that does have that water utility discount program. Try and make sure the apartment managers even know that at those apartments. Sometimes that's not something that's well known by everybody. So within my role, I really am just trying to help people figure out what are those options, how to help them apply for those options, what other programs might be able to assist them. And that's really my whole spiel in a nutshell. Fast, for me, that's fast. I'm looking forward to questions at the end.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jeff.
So I'll just start by saying that the population of individuals that are experiencing homelessness in our nation, it's definitely graying or silvering, depending on how you want to frame that. Currently, 1/3 of the homeless population nationally falls between the birth cohort of 1955 to 1965. These individuals are aging prematurely and are experiencing aging-related morbidity and mortality in increasing numbers. Within the homeless services field, individuals experiencing homelessness are considered geriatric at age 50. Adults experiencing homelessness in their 50s and 60s are experiencing health conditions, both cognitive and functional, at rates comparable to their housed counterparts who are 20 years older. This is above and beyond the chronic medical conditions typically associated with homelessness, such as substance abuse and mental illness. Most have spent their lives working low-wage manual labor jobs. Their wages are not keeping up with the ever-increasing rents, and their bodies can no longer sustain the lifting and bending required by their jobs. Because poverty begets both poor health, because poverty begets poor health, a shift out of the workforce may occur earlier for these individuals who most need the income. Both shelter and healthcare costs for this group are high and anticipated to increase rapidly as they continue to age. Research predicts the homeless population ages 55 and older could soon cost the nation an estimated $5 billion annually in healthcare and shelter costs alone. I will say that locally, just to give a little bit of context for us here, overall, through all shelter house services, the population that is between 55 and older is really about 16% of our total population. But when we start to go through the different interventions that we offer, the housing interventions that we offer, you can really see some very different trends. Specifically for individuals whose first episode of homelessness has occurred later in life, beginning in around the age of 45 or 50, and that is the first time that they have experienced homelessness. Typically that is occurring because of a marital breakup, a loss of a spouse, a health-related, a serious health-related incident, and coupled with the fact that these individuals, as I previously said, have been typically in low-wage earning jobs, don't have healthcare coverage, and have absolutely no elasticity in their living situation to respond to a change in their household income. As Jerry mentioned, individuals who are 50 and older are at the highest risk of paying more than 30% of their household income on rent or mortgage, and this leaves them at much greater exposure to housing instability and homelessness. For these individuals where it's a first-time homeless situation, we're serving them through our rapid rehousing services, which means that we work with local landlords. We can assist with security deposit assistance, rent assistance, and ongoing support as people transition from a homeless situation, from a shelter into their own housing, and then connect them with resources in the community, reaching out to Jeff and others in the community, that housing authority that can provide them with these supports that will help them be successful in sustaining their housing. So really looking at, for these individuals, the housing affordability gap, increasing the supply of housing that is affordable for extremely low income households, and really investing in the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Those can be the immediate fixes. And we've shown that there's the capacity to do that as the nation in this pandemic response. Those could fix, could cure, could eliminate homelessness for individuals that are 50 and older who are becoming homeless for the first time. It really is those kind of lighter touches. Might sound like a lot, but it's not. You look at right now, we're spending over $12 billion a year annually on shelter services alone. Put into context, 31 billion more into housing choice vouchers to end homelessness for that cohort of the population. It starts to really make a lot more sense. And then not even touching on increasing minimum wage to a livable wage and not expecting people to live in these situations in the first place and to devolve in these situations. For individuals who are chronically homeless, though, and over years have experienced multiple episodes of homelessness, extended experiences of homelessness, and continue to experience homelessness as they move into their 50s and older, for those individuals, we're targeting them with what is called permanent supportive housing. And just as an example, within shelter house permanent supportive housing programs, over 40% of the folks that are in our permanent supportive housing are 55 and older. I'll say there's also a correlation between who is chronic homelessness and gender. Over 75% of the chronic homeless population is male, and that's probably for a future conversation as to why that happens. But permanent supportive housing, a housing intervention that takes and combines housing affordability, guarantees that the housing through different mechanisms, it costs the individual no more than 30% of their income, and attaching supports necessary to help that individual, that household sustain the housing successfully. That's permanent supportive housing, but then using what's called a housing first approach, which means very low barrier. There's no requirement for the individual to demonstrate sobriety, med compliance, or any level of income. It is based on the understanding, the premise that housing is a human right. So taking those two things in combination, permanent supportive housing, housing first intervention, and having those resources available for individuals that are chronically homeless and in that age cohort, and then ensuring that in the construction of those spaces that thoughtful planning is given to the requirements for people to be able to age in place in those spaces, because as I mentioned, people are aging much more quickly in the homeless population, so that you build those things in both in the physical structure, you're accommodating that, and thoughtfully in the support services that you're making available, so people are able to live with dignity and live out their lives with you in these permanent supportive housing housing opportunities. And that's what we're doing here locally.
We have Sarah Barron, and she's with the, did I say that correctly? Okay, great. With the Johnson County Affordable Housing Coalition. And today she will be speaking on the manufactured and modular homes here in the Johnson County community.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm gonna start by saying that it's about time when people start to arrive home, and my dog likes to greet them by barking very loudly. So my apologies in advance for Bonnie if she goes bananas. I'm Sarah Barron. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the executive director of the Johnson County Affordable Housing Coalition. And our mission is to do education and advocacy and partnership development so that everyone in Johnson County can have a safe and stable and affordable place to call home. Obviously, you've learned from our presenters today, I have not put myself out of a job quite yet. But that is our goal and our vision. And I believe that Johnson County, Iowa is a place that can solve these crises. We have the resources, we have the determination, and we have all the great folks who are on this meeting today who can solve these problems, but we must make it a priority. We must commit to dreaming big and acting boldly. And that is the key to getting this done. I'm so glad that I get the opportunity today to talk about manufactured housing, which is somewhere between renting and home ownership. And it's a really significant part of the affordable housing puzzle for many, many older adults in Johnson County and beyond. Manufactured housing, which sometimes we call mobile homes, and we don't do that very much anymore, and I'll talk more about why in a bit, is housing that tends to be more affordable, even without some of the subsidies that we've discussed so far. And it's pretty readily available. It also provides potentially an opportunity to live in a good, supportive neighborhood community. And that can be very important for people as they're aging. And also, I'll say that the quality of manufactured housing has improved dramatically since the 1980s. So if you're living in a new manufactured home that's been built sometime since the 2000s, the chances that that home is very similar in the quality of materials to a stick-built home is pretty high. So we've got a lot of good things going for us when it comes to manufactured housing. And there are 3,000 households in Johnson County total that live in manufactured housing. So we know that a significant percentage of folks here in Johnson County live in manufactured housing. The data from manufactured housing suggests that about half of all people who live in manufactured housing nationwide are 55 plus. So we put those two numbers together and we know that there is a significant number of older adults living in manufactured housing in Johnson County. There are some other things to note about this population. They're much more likely to live below the federal poverty line than single family home owners. And that's not a surprise because I've already said that manufactured housing tends to be a more affordable home ownership option, right? So people have found that and they're staying in it. But, you know, when we think about older adults, we talk about fixed income. And I'll admit that I haven't always given that term a lot of consideration, but really what it means is we're talking about a population of people who are not likely to see their capacity for increasing their income go up. Or I'm saying that too redundantly, but right, their income is not going to change. The amount of money that's coming in every month is going to stay pretty static, sometimes over a period of decades, right? And so when we're talking about housing and we're talking about cost burden, like Dr. Anthony talked about, if my housing cost goes up every year, but the amount of money that comes into my household does not change, my housing becomes more and more of a cost burden as the years go on. And for people in manufactured housing in Johnson County and beyond, that is a particular concern because unfortunately the laws in Iowa are very disadvantageous for people who live in manufactured housing. Unlike some other states in the United States, we don't have a handle on the rights of property owners to do pretty much whatever they want to people who live in manufactured homes. So for those of you who don't already know this, most people who live in manufactured homes own their home and they pay rent on the land under their home, a monthly rent. So they might be able to buy their house for about half the cost of a normal stick-built house, like the one I'm talking to you from right now, just a regular single-family house. But they pay a little bit of rent every month for the land and the community maintenance that their house is situated on. In Johnson County here, up until very recently, it was really common for that rent to be a very affordable amount. somewhere around $250, $350 a month. People who are planning for aging and who knew they were going to have that fixed income found that a really good housing option because it was a manageable amount of money that constituted a relatively small percentage of that annual amount. But unfortunately in Iowa, there's nothing requiring that property managers raise that amount at a reasonable rate. And so what we have seen happen recently is that people from out of state, private equity investors who have the explicit goal of making money for their investors are buying manufactured housing communities. And they're dramatically raising that monthly rent that is charged to people who have their homes there. So many people in Johnson County have seen their rents just in the last year or two go up by 50%, 60%. Now, again, for older adults, we're talking about that fixed income. Every time that amount goes up, their ability to have more income does not go up at the same pace. And so it's cutting into what people have free for all their other basic needs, expenses, and beyond. And we hear from Iowans across the state who are now, they were stable before, and now they're making the choice between paying their housing bill or paying for their medications, going to the doctor, buying groceries, all of those other things. And that's a problem. There are some things that we can do in the state of Iowa to prevent this from happening and to keep manufactured housing a really stable place for people to age. But it does require some changes to our Iowa law, and it requires some really targeted advocacy. I think it's reasonable for people to have to justify why they're raising the rent. If costs go up a little bit, we understand the rent cost might go up, but the costs are not proportional to the expenses of the business. It's just simply the understanding that people who live in manufactured homes cannot really move those homes. It costs like $10,000 to move them, which most people don't have. And so they're stuck there. They want to keep their home. They have no choice but to pay whatever lot rent is charged to them. And in fact, one owner, not in Iowa, somewhere else, described people living in manufactured housing as customers who are chained to the booth at a restaurant. They have no choice but to eat there. That is the situation that we find people in manufactured housing. And so there are protections that we can extend to them that will give them reasonable rent increases, will protect them from no cause eviction. Can you imagine if someone could come up and put a note on your door and say, you didn't do anything wrong, but you got to get out in 3 months or 4 months. That is the scenario that everyone who lives in a manufactured house faces in Iowa right now. They are allowed to evict them for no reason. And again, eviction doesn't just mean that they have to leave the lot rent. It almost always leaves they have to leave their home behind. And something like 85% of people who live in manufactured homes own that home. So when that happens to older adults, they're not just losing the place that they live. They also run the risk of losing all of their equity, all of their investment, everything that they've put into that home that's supposed to be the stable place for them, because they may not be able to. We see so many people who end up walking away from all of it because of the ways the laws are structured in Iowa. If you came today and you wanted to learn about the rights of older adults and housing insecurity, we have given you one of the most depressing presentations I have been to in a long time. We've identified a number of problems and challenges that we face as a community. But I think that the thread to pull from all this is that each of these things is fixable. If we are willing to prioritize the lives and health and stability of older adults, if we understand that if we use our resources in a smart way, we do have affordable and sustainable options for people, right? But we have to rethink it, and we have to really make those needs and that stability a priority. And we need to push back against the idea that housing is a commodity that we can't touch. You know, we can't do anything to regulate it or ask for things or anything like that, because as everyone here, I hope, agrees with me, housing is a human right. And that means that we do what we need to do to ensure that people have access to that right? And so that's really the priority that I want to highlight for you today. I also want to mention really quickly, that we haven't even begun to talk about other identities and how they intersect with aging. So despite all the great resources that we have in Johnson County, for example, I'm going to be able to access those a lot more easily than someone who doesn't speak English fluently. I'm going to be able to access those a lot more easily because I have internet access and I know how to read what I see on the internet and all of those other things. I have generational wealth, so parents that I'll inherit money from and kids who will have jobs that can support me, okay? We have lots of folks in the community that don't check all of those boxes, and they're going to need different kinds of support. And so we want to really think about that when we talk about policy too. That's my asterisk for the whole conversation today. Okay, thanks.
Well, thank you so much. I can't imagine a better way to wrap it up there. So I appreciate that very much. I'm going to change this view. I don't have you spotlighted, but if you want to see everyone on the screen in your upper right hand corner, you can go to gallery view. So I would just like to put it out there to all of those names that I see on the screen right now. If you have a question, feel free to turn your camera back on and unmute yourself or put a question in the chat box.
I just wanted to thank the panelists for all the information and Sarah for your optimism. Can you talk to us, anybody, about concrete advocacy steps that maybe we all can participate in? Thank you.
I can start, but I hope other people will jump in too. One of our local politicians frequently says that your budget reflects your priorities. And I absolutely believe that is true. We have to see continued increases in investments in housing from our local governments. But local government alone is not going to solve the problems that we outlined today. Johnson County a few years back raised the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. And then the Iowa legislature took away its ability to do that. Despite all of the complex things we talked about, there's a very clear equation that if your housing is affordable when you can afford it, okay, and so we can either lower the cost of housing or we can increase the amount of money people have available to pay their bills. And Chrissy mentioned this. We really need to move toward a livable wage. Now, tomorrow, we're not going to get the state of Iowa to change its mind about the minimum wage, but we can vote every day with our dollars. Businesses let us know when they're paying a higher that 1010 or over wage. We can let those folks know that we give them our business because they pay that wage. We can continue to pressure the state to raise, to 1010. We're really falling behind the rest of the nation when it comes to that. There are so many other states where the minimum wage is dramatically higher. And I think sometimes as Iowans, we forget that. So there are a lot of things we can do to just simply increase the amount of money that people have in their pockets. There are also a lot of federal initiatives right now that are gaining traction, like expanding subsidies to households as an entitlement. So anyone who needs it can get the subsidy. We have to let people know how much we support those types of ideas. And we have to make sure that we're starting with those local folks all the way up to our federal representatives, let them know all the time what a priority that is for us. And I'll just say too, I'm looking forward to growing advocacy about this because Dr. Anthony let us know this population is growing, and I hope that voice grows with it. And all of us who love people who are aging and are beginning to see more firsthand some of these issues that they're facing, okay, we need to not let that up. We need to really push hard for that.
The housing problems of older persons are nested within the housing problems of everyone, right? And advocating housing problems for everyone, advocating for solutions for, to solve housing problems for everyone can lift all boats. It can help, solve housing problems for older adults. But also specifically, whenever at local level, people try to increase housing subsidies or housing, different kinds of housing that is built, there's always this NIMBY problem, not in my backyard. The NIMBY problem is least when housing is for older persons. Okay, this has been documented very well. So So it is, we should be able to get more success on solving housing problems of older persons locally. There'll be less, NIMBY opposition to them. But, but I think we should really aim for lifting all boats, raising housing so that all boats are lifted. Now, locally, their local laws can make a difference. For example, if the city were to say that all units that are built henceforth from today onwards will have these 5 accessibility features that the census tracks, that'll make such a big difference, because all these accessibility features, which are good for older adults, actually make life more comfortable for not so old adults as well. So this is like life cycle housing. So incorporating that would make a big difference. Second, pushing for ADUs or accessory dwelling units that can Iowa City had done a study on this several years ago. I don't know what's come of that. I don't think many accessory dwelling units are getting built, but encouraging those units to being built would be a very big thing. Right now, there are 2 pieces of federal legislation that are separate from the 3.84 trillion reconciliation package that's going on, and both these pieces have bipartisan support. And I wish I had the house numbers before the file numbers before me. But if anyone is interested, and please, I hope someone is, please email me and I'll send you these file numbers and talk to our representatives and tell them support this. There is one called the Housing Affordability Act. I don't have the full name off the top of my head. It has been introduced both in the Senate and in the House, but with bipartisan support. Because of all this drama that is happening, it's not getting much attention, but that would be really useful. And the other is an act which is really very good, very aptly named. It's called the Yes in My Backyard Act. And this also has bipartisan support. And this is also for housing. Now, let me just share something else with you that is, it is on the lift all boats argument for housing argument. At the university, every year we get contacted by communities, small communities across the state, that come to us and ask for 2 things: a housing plan and funding for executing that plan. Why are these communities asking us? Many small communities in Iowa are actually their economies are not dying; they are thriving, and they are finding that the lack of affordably priced housing is shackling their growth because they cannot attract workers to their expanding economy. And so housing is moving beyond just a social or a human right thing. It is moving beyond that. And this is the right moment to capitalize on that. It's moving to an economic necessity, something that is hampering economic growth if you don't have it. So this is a great moment in time to actually push for housing at the local level, at the state level, and at the national level. Our delegation in Congress is very supportive of this argument.